A rancher named Elias Holt had lived alone for years on his remote Montana spread, far from the bustle of towns like Bozeman or Helena, until 7 striking widows begged to stay the night. But what Elias saw in their eyes that stormy evening wasn't desperation, it was something far more dangerous. The wind howled like a wounded beast across the rugged plains, rattling every loose board of Elias's weathered ranch house. He stood at his kitchen window, coffee cooling in his calloused hands, watching storm clouds swallow the last traces of daylight. For 8 years, no soul had crossed his threshold uninvited. For 8 years, that's how he liked it. The sound of hoofbeats slicing through the rain froze him in place. Through the curtains of water spilling off his roof, he made out 7 figures on horseback, their dark silhouettes hunched against the wind. Women, all of them, riding with the kind of urgency that came from having nowhere else to go. Elias set his mug down with deliberate slowness. His hand drifted toward the rifle hung above the fireplace, then paused. These weren't bandits or cattle rustlers, but something about the way they rode, too close, too coordinated, too deliberate, made the hair on his neck stand up. The lead rider dismounted first. Even through the storm, Elias could see she was striking. Auburn hair plastered to her face, a torn but expensive traveling dress clinging to her frame, she approached his door with the confidence of someone used to getting her way. The other 6 stayed mounted, their faces shadowed under wide-brimmed hats, but their posture spoke of women who'd seen too much of the world's cruelty. "Sir," the woman called, her voice cutting through the wind. "Please, we need shelter for the night." Elias studied them through the glass. Something was off. 7 women traveling alone through this godforsaken stretch of Montana in weather that could kill a man and his horse? Their mounts weren't the worn-out nags of desperate travelers. These horses were well-fed, well-groomed. He recalled his father's words from decades ago, "A man's character is measured by how he treats those who can do nothing for him." But his father had never met women who carried themselves like soldiers and smiled like they held secrets. The auburn-haired woman knocked again, harder this time. "Sir, please, we won't make it to town in this storm." Elias Holt paced toward the door, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor. Every instinct screamed to keep that door barred. 8 years of solitude had taught him that people brought nothing but trouble and pain, but the storm was worsening. Even if these women were running from something, or someone, he couldn't let them die on his land. His hand hovered over the door handle. Through the wood, he heard them murmuring to each other, voices too low to make out words, planning something, maybe, or just trying to stay warm. What Elias didn't know was that the moment he opened that door, everything he thought he understood about right and wrong, trust and betrayal, and the cost of loneliness would be tested in ways that would leave him questioning whether some acts of mercy were worth the price. Because these 7 women hadn't stumbled upon his Montana ranch by chance, and the storm that brought them to his doorstep was nothing compared to the one they were about to unleash inside his home, Elias opened the door. The storm surged in like an uninvited guest. The auburn-haired woman stood there, water streaming from her travel cloak, but her green eyes held no gratitude, only calculation. Behind her, the other 6 women had dismounted and were leading their horses toward his barn without being asked. "Thank you," she said, stepping inside before he could reconsider. "I'm Charlotte Vale. These are my traveling companions." The pause before companions tightened Elias's jaw. He watched through the doorway as the women moved with military precision, tending their horses like they'd done it 100 times before. These weren't helpless widows caught in a storm. These were women with a plan. "Where you headed?" Elias asked, closing the door behind Charlotte but keeping his hand near his rifle. "California," she replied smoothly, shedding her cloak to reveal a dress worth more than most men earned in a year. "My husband left me property there. We're all recent widows. Thought we'd make the journey together for safety." The other 6 women entered Elias Holt's Montana ranch house one by one, each more striking than the last, each carrying a strange mix of vulnerability and danger. A blonde, no older than 25, with eyes that had seen too much, a brunette with scarred hands that spoke of violence, a redhead who smiled too much and watched everything. They thanked Elias with honeyed voices, but their eyes scanned his home as if cataloging anything of value. The way they positioned themselves in his small living room, never turning their backs to each other, always with clear paths to the door, made Elias's blood run cold. "We're mighty grateful for your hospitality," said the youngest, batting her eyes with a practiced flirtation. "We've been riding for days. Haven't seen another soul for miles." That was a lie. Elias had spotted dust clouds from riders earlier that afternoon, maybe 3 hours behind these women. Someone was following them, and they knew it. "Coffee's still hot," he offered, testing them. "Help yourselves while I check on your horses." "Oh, no need to trouble yourself," Charlotte Vale said quickly. "The animals are settled. We're quite capable of tending to ourselves." Another red flag. Women in this part of Montana never refused help with horses, especially in weather like this. And the way Charlotte's hand kept drifting to something hidden in the folds of her dress told Elias she was armed and ready to use whatever she carried. He moved to the kitchen, pouring coffee with hands steady despite the alarms ringing in his head. Through the window, he glimpsed their horses in his barn, fine animals with expensive tack, but foam flecked their mouths, suggesting they'd been ridden hard and fast, fleeing something, not leisurely traveling to California. "Nice place you've got here," remarked the brunette, fingering the fabric of his curtains. "Must get lonely, a man living all alone." "I like it that way," Elias replied, handing out tin mugs. "Less complicated." The women exchanged glances. Quick, meaningful looks that confirmed what Elias already suspected. They weren't here by accident, and they had no intention of leaving quietly come morning. As thunder cracked overhead, Charlotte Vale drifted to the window of Elias Holt's Montana ranch house, peering into the darkness. "Terrible night to be out there," she murmured. "Good thing we found your place when we did." But the way she scanned the road, shoulders tense, told Elias she wasn't worried about the storm. She was watching for whoever was following them. And when those riders arrived, because they would, Elias would be caught in the middle of something that would make this storm feel like a gentle breeze. The clock on Elias's mantel struck 9, each chime echoing through the tension-filled room. The women had settled into his furniture like they owned the place, but their eyes never stopped moving, never stopped calculating. Charlotte remained by the window, staring out with the intensity of a hawk tracking prey. "Tell me about your husbands," Elias said, settling into his chair with his coffee. "What kind of men were they?" The question hit the room like a blow. The blonde, who'd introduced herself as Lily, nearly dropped her mug. The redhead's smile faltered for the first time. But Charlotte turned from the window with a look that could have frozen hell itself. "Dead men," she said flatly. "The kind not worth talking about." Elias nodded slowly, studying their faces. "Funny thing about widows in this territory," he said. "Most wear black. Most travel with kin or folks from their town. Most don't carry pistols under their skirts." The brunette, Nora, shifted in her seat, and Elias caught the glint of metal beneath her dress. "A woman alone's got to protect herself," she said defensively. 7 women alone, Elias corrected. 7 beautiful women with fine horses, fancy clothes, and enough weapons to outfit a small army. That ain't widows heading to California. That's something else entirely. The youngest, who'd barely spoken, suddenly stood. Her hands shook, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't keep lying." "Sit down, Ivy," Charlotte ordered, her voice sharp as shattered glass. But Ivy shook her head, backing toward the door. "He's been nothing but kind to us, and we're going to," she didn't finish. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every woman now stared at Ivy, their expressions ranging from fury to fear. Elias's hand inched toward his rifle, realization dawning like ice forming on winter water. "Going to what, Ivy?" he asked quietly. Before Ivy could answer Elias Holt's question, the sound of horses thundering through the Montana storm cut through the tense silence. Multiple riders, coming fast despite the weather. Charlotte Vale spun toward the window, her face paling. "They found us," she breathed. The other women leapt to their feet, revealing an arsenal hidden beneath their feminine facades. Derringers, knives, even a sawed-off shotgun. The redhead, Tessa, pulled from under her travel coat. "Who found you?" Elias demanded, rising from his chair. Charlotte turned to face him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, genuine fear flickered in her green eyes. "Men who don't take kindly to being robbed," she said. "Men who've been tracking us for 3 days across 2 territories." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. These weren't widows. They were thieves, con artists, and they'd led a gang of vengeful men straight to Elias's door. "How much did you take?" he asked. "Enough to make them very angry," Charlotte replied. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by coarse shouts promising violence. Ivy was sobbing now, while the others checked their weapons with the practiced efficiency of people who'd killed before. But what none of them knew, what Elias hadn't told a soul in 8 long years, was that before he became a reclusive Montana rancher, he'd been something else entirely. Something that might keep them all alive through the night, if he decided they were worth saving. The riders burst into Elias's yard like demons emerging from the storm. Through the rain-lashed windows, he counted at least 8 men, maybe more. Their leader, a hulking figure in a black duster, dismounted and barked orders that sliced through the gale like knives. Spread out, check the barn. If they're here, I want them alive. Charlotte gripped Elias's arm, her fingers digging like claws. Please, she whispered, all pretense stripped away. They'll kill us all if they find us. Elias looked into her eyes and saw a familiar terror, the kind that came from knowing exactly what men were capable of when they felt wronged. He'd seen that look before, in mirrors and on the faces of people he'd failed to save. What did you take from them? Elias Holt asked, his voice steady despite the chaos outside his Montana ranch house. Money, said Nora, the brunette with scarred hands. A lot of money. From their poker game in Missoula. How much? Elias pressed. Enough to buy a small town, whispered Lily, the blonde. Ivy, still curled in the corner, whimpered, they'll do terrible things to us, worse than dying. Heavy pounding shook Elias's door, followed by a gravelly voice dripping with menace. Open up. We know you're in there. Elias studied the 7 women. Beneath their beauty, their weapons, their lies, he saw something that reminded him of his sister, dead because no one had been there to protect her when evil came calling. Deliver 7 thieves who deceived him and brought danger to his door, or risk everything to shield women who might be killers but were surely about to become victims. He moved toward his rifle, then stopped. Instead, he pried up a loose floorboard near the fireplace, revealing a cache of weapons that made the women's arsenal look like toys, military-grade rifles, ammunition, and something else that widened Charlotte's eyes in recognition. You're not just a rancher, she breathed. Used to be a marshal, Elias said, checking the loads of a repeating rifle. Before I decided civilization wasn't worth saving. The door exploded inward, splinters flying like shrapnel. The first man through was built like a mountain, scars mapping a history of violence, eyes promising more. Behind him came others, hard men with harder faces, the kind who'd sell their kin for a horse and a bottle. Well, well, said their leader, water dripping from his black hat. Elias Holt. Heard you'd gone soft, playing farmer out here. Hello, Kane, Elias replied, voice cold as stone. Still collecting debts for cowards too weak to do their own dirty work? Kane McBride, Elias should have known. A man who'd made a career hunting those who didn't want to be found and making them wish they'd never been born. His presence meant these women had stolen from someone with serious connections. Hand over the ladies, Elias, and we'll leave. This doesn't have to involve you. It already does, Elias said, stepping between Kane and the women. They asked for shelter. I gave my word. Kane laughed, a sound like rocks in a grinder. Your word? To a pack of thieves? They stole from the wrong man, Elias. Money that belongs to folks who don't forgive or forget. Then they should have been smarter about who they played cards with, Elias shot back. Hand them over, or we'll take them, and everything you own. Elias met Kane's gaze without blinking. You can try. The silence that followed was thick with the promise of violence. 8 armed men against an aging ex-marshal and 7 desperate women. The odds were grim, the situation hopeless, and the storm outside seemed tame compared to what was about to erupt inside this small ranch house. The standoff in Elias Holt's Montana ranch house stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Kane McBride's men fanned out, weapons trained on the 7 women huddled behind Elias. The storm outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the violence to erupt. You know, Elias, Kane said, peeling off his soaked gloves with deliberate slowness, I heard stories about why you really quit being a marshal. Something about a bank job in Great Falls, evidence that went missing. Elias's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Behind him, Charlotte's gaze bored into his back, reassessing her reluctant protector. Oh yeah, Kane continued, savoring the moment. Word is, some money never made it back to the bank. A lot of money. Makes a man wonder how a simple marshal afforded a spread like this. Fishing in empty waters, Kane? Elias said coolly. Kane gestured, and his men raised their guns. Way I see it, you and these ladies are cut from the same cloth. Thieves, all of you. Only difference is, you got away with it. Ivy whimpered from the corner, and Lily gripped her derringer so tightly her knuckles whitened. Nora scanned for angles, while Tessa, the redhead, seemed almost eager for bloodshed. But Charlotte stepped forward, past Elias's protective stance, to face Kane directly. The money we took, she said quietly, wasn't just sitting in some poker game. It was payment for girls, young girls bought and sold like livestock. The room went deathly silent. Even Kane's men shifted uneasily. We didn't rob gamblers, Charlotte continued, her voice gaining strength. We robbed men who trade in human misery. Men who destroy innocence for profit. Pretty story, Kane sneered, but his tone wavered. Doesn't change the fact you took what wasn't yours. It was never theirs either, Nora snapped, her weapon now visible. Every cent was paid for with a child's tears. Elias looked at the women anew. Not just thieves, vigilantes, taking justice into their own hands when the law failed. It explained their coordination, their weapons, their meticulous planning. They weren't fleeing to California, they were chasing redemption. Don't care, Kane said, conviction faltering. A job's a job. Money's money. Even blood money? Elias asked. Especially blood money. Pays better. That's when Elias made his choice, not just to protect 7 women, but to confront the evil that had haunted him since Great Falls, the same darkness that drove him into isolation. He moved like a man 20 years younger, his rifle speaking before Kane could draw. The bullet took Kane in the shoulder, spinning him to his knees. The gunfire erupted like thunder. Kane's men, caught off guard by Elias's speed and the women's revelation, hesitated for a fatal second. Charlotte's derringer barked, dropping the man nearest the door. Lily and Nora moved like a trained unit, their shots precise. Tessa laughed as she fired, a sound more chilling than any scream. Only Ivy stayed curled in the corner, sobbing as violence exploded around her. Elias worked his rifle with lethal precision, his martial skills undimmed by years of solitude. These men had come to his home to collect human cargo. They'd leave as corpses. Fall back. Kane shouted, blood streaming from his wound. But there was nowhere to run. The storm had turned the world outside into a howling void, and inside, Elias and the women had made his home a killing ground. One of Kane's men grabbed Ivy, pressing a knife to her throat. Drop your weapons or she dies. Elias's blood froze. On the man's wrist, barely visible under his sleeve, was a mark, a symbol he'd seen in Great Falls, on the wrist of a dead girl no older than 14. The same mark these women had been fighting. You know what that symbol means, don't you? Charlotte shouted, seeing Elias's recognition. You've seen it before. He had, on victims, on evidence that vanished, on bodies dismissed as accident. The mark of an organization that treated humans like cattle. Great Falls, Elias whispered, realization flooding him. That's why the evidence disappeared. Why they buried the case. Your own people were in on it, Nora confirmed, her gun still on Kane. Judges, sheriffs, politicians, all bought. The man holding Ivy pressed his knife closer. I said, drop your weapons. Instead, Elias did something that stunned the room. He set down his rifle and pulled a small metal badge from his shirt, not his old marshal's star, but something else, something that made Kane's eyes widen in fear. Federal Marshal, Elias said softly. Special Division. I've been hunting your outfit for 8 years. The room fell silent, save for the storm's roar. Kane stared at the badge like it was a venomous snake. The Hermit Act, Charlotte breathed. It was all a cover. Deep cover, Elias confirmed, eyes locked on Ivy's captor, waiting for the right moment. 8 years watching, learning, mapping your network, your bosses, routes, buyers, every name, every deal. The man with the knife sweated, realizing he was trapped between federal justice and 7 armed women. Let her go, Elias said, and I'll make sure you live to testify. Against who? The man demanded. Everyone, Elias replied. Every politician who took your money, every judge who looked away, every sheriff who buried evidence. I've got 8 years of records hidden where your bosses'll never find them. The man's resolve cracked. His knife wavered, and in that moment, Ivy proved stronger than anyone expected. She drove her elbow into his gut, breaking free and leaving him exposed. 7 guns spoke as one, turning him into a cautionary tale about underestimating desperate women. Kane, bleeding and broken, surveyed the carnage of his crew. Only 2 of his men remained, wounded, staring at Elias's badge like it was their death warrant. "You played us all," Kane groaned. "A federal all along." "The difference is I was doing my job," Elias said, holstering his weapon. Charlotte lowered her smoking derringer, studying Elias with newfound respect. 8 years building a case, she said. "That takes a special kind of patience." "A special kind of rage," Elias corrected. "The kind that doesn't burn out, just burns deeper." Ivy, no longer sobbing, stood over her would-be killer's body, her face hardened into something beyond grief or vengeance. "How many girls?" she asked quietly. "How many did your bosses buy and sell?" Kane's laugh was a bloody cough. "You think killing us stops anything? You think this ends it?" "No," Elias said, kneeling beside him. "This is just the start. I didn't just watch for 8 years. I documented. Names, dates, deals, locations, your entire operation mapped out." "Where?" Kane demanded. "Safe," Elias said. "Federal custody. And now that you've confirmed my intel by coming here, admitting what these women stole, showing those marks on your wrists, well, I've got everything I need to bring your whole network down." Nora checked the window for more riders. "Is it really over?" she asked. "For us, yes," Charlotte said, daring to believe it. "But for them?" She looked at Elias. "What about the men at the top?" "They fall," Elias said simply. "Federal marshals are already moving on safe houses across 3 territories. By morning, the organization that ruined so many lives will be a memory." The storm outside began to ease. Through the shattered door, dawn's first light painted the Montana sky in hues of hope. Inside, among the blood and bodies, 7 women and a federal marshal sat in the aftermath of their private war. "What about us?" Lily asked. "We're still thieves. We took money that wasn't ours." "Evidence money," Elias corrected. "Seized as part of a federal investigation. You ladies just helped execute a warrant." Tessa laughed, the sound lighter now. "So we're heroines?" "Survivors," Elias said. "Sometimes that's the same thing." As morning light revealed the carnage in his home, Elias wondered if any of them would ever truly escape the darkness they'd fought. Victory came at a cost, measured in pieces of your soul you could never reclaim. The real question was whether what they'd saved was worth what they'd lost. The sun climbed higher, bathing the ranch in golden light that felt almost obscene after the night's violence. Kane died before dawn, his last words a curse to no one. His surviving men, bound and broken, awaited the federal marshals Elias had signaled. The network that terrorized innocents across 3 territories was finished, but the cost hung heavy in the morning air. Ivy found her voice again. "What happens to us now?" she asked, no longer the frightened girl from the corner. The night had forged her into something tougher, for better or worse. "You disappear," Elias said, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. "New names, new lives, new territories. Together or apart?" Charlotte asked, already knowing the answer. "Your choice. But understand, the women who walked into this house last night are dead. What walks out are new creations." Nora nodded, grasping the weight of that truth. "Maybe that's not so bad. Maybe those women needed to die." Approaching hoofbeats made everyone tense, but these riders arrived in daylight, federal badges gleaming, papers in hand. The cleanup team had come to process the scene, to make bodies vanish, to turn a night of violence into bureaucratic reports for government files. Marshal Federal Dawson, the lead rider, announced, dismounting with precision. "Operation complete?" "Complete and successful," Elias confirmed. "The network's broken. Evidence is secure. These ladies are under federal protection." Dawson studied the women with a jaded eye. "They'll need new identities, full backstories. Expensive work." "They earned it," Elias said firmly. "Blood payment, the costliest kind." As the federal team worked, the women prepared to leave the man who'd saved their lives, and maybe their souls. Ivy lingered, approaching Elias with a hint of shyness. "The money we stole," she said softly. "What happens to it?" "What do you want to happen?" Elias asked. "There are places," she whispered. "Safe places for girls who've been hurt. They need funds, protection, someone to care." Elias nodded. I'll make sure it gets to the right hands. Charlotte was the last to approach. You could have turned us in, she said. Claimed the bounty, lived quietly forever. Peace isn't something you achieve, Elias replied. It's something you choose, every day, every decision. Last night, I chose to stand with people protecting innocence. That's the closest men like me get to peace. What about you? She asked. What happens to the federal marshal when this is done? Elias surveyed his blood-stained ranch, forever changed. My cover's blown, he said, with a trace of a smile. Time for a new mission. The women rode off as the morning sun peaked, vanishing into the vast Montana territory with new names and futures few could choose. They dissolved like smoke in clean air, leaving only memories and the truth that justice sometimes comes from unexpected places. Elias stood in his doorway, watching them go, reflecting on 8 years of patient waiting and 1 night of decisive action. His house would need cleaning, rebuilding, maybe an exorcism. But for the first time in nearly a decade, he felt something like satisfaction. The best victories left scars. The greatest battles were fought by those with nothing left to lose. And sometimes, mercy and justice walked hand in hand down a dusty trail, leaving the world a little cleaner than they found it.